What makes you optimistic?
There's so many things, but the core thing that makes me optimistic is humanity. I think we are capable of so much, and especially when we really try hard, we can achieve amazing things. And so we do that in small things all the time, but we can also really make an effort, and we can achieve great things. And of course, there are still many bad things going on in the world. But if you look at humanity as sort of growing up, as a human being growing up, we're maybe a teenager now, or a little bit older than that. So we still have a lot to learn, and so, but it's progress. It doesn't mean everything is good now or everything is bad. You know, you have to look at the trajectory, and I see that most people want to do good things in the world, and that makes me very optimistic.
We've started asking different questions. We've asked 20,000 people that question, what makes you optimistic? Having really had a bit closer look at the neuroscience of optimism, we're now starting to ask an additional, more emotional question, which is what makes you feel optimistic? And yesterday, a woman said to me, being in the arms of my little children. So for you, what are the experiences that really make you feel optimistic?
It's when I see it's often the sort of David versus Goliath, when you see we see someone or a small group of people really trying to make some sort of change, something, trying to make something better in society, and they often dedicate their life to it, even though the odds are totally against them. And if you read the history of the world, or at least of humanity, you can see many of the breakthroughs in thinking, in science, general thinking, values, and many other aspects. Often it's someone or a small group of people that first thought, okay, is it really this way? Isn't it that way? And they have some, then bizarre theory, and every expert says no, that's completely idiotic. Of course it's not that way. But they keep fighting, and sometimes they're wrong, obviously, but sometimes they're right, and it changes how entire humanity thinks or values something. And those kind of stories of people like that makes me very optimistic. And those are the big things you hear about. But when I was in politics earlier, one of the great things of being in politics and being a member of parliament is that you get to visit a lot of people, a lot of companies, organizations, and others doing things. They welcome you and they tell you about what they're doing. And in those small stories that get no coverage, especially not in the news media, there's so much good in that. They try to improve, and they test something new, and that makes me very optimistic to see that. And it was sort of that made me also frustrated that these people and these small breakthroughs and small innovations and small steps forward doesn't get much attention. That made me annoyed, because I felt there's so much hope in here. There's so many opportunities in here that we miss because we listen too much to the pessimists.
So you called yourself an angry optimist, and you'll love this. Last year in our Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit, a 16-year-old girl got up and said, "I'm an angry optimist," and she listed the 3 things that made her angry. And then she quoted Zelensky and said, "But I believe in people," and gave her solutions. So tell us more about this notion of you as the angry optimist, and what is angry optimism?
Yeah, it's this frustration that I just touched on, that you see people they're trying to make a difference in the world, trying to make something better. They have a new idea, a new innovation, something new they want to try. And then you see the pessimists around them, especially in news media, also a lot in social media, but also this kind of general pessimism that could be around. that no, that's never gonna work, or blah blah blah. And they haven't even thought things through, or they focus entirely on something, a small problem that could be a real problem, but it's very small, or it could happen maybe in 20 years if everything goes wrong. It could happen. Of course, we should not ignore those things, but we shouldn't make them our focus. That's something to solve on the way to this whatever innovation or breakthrough or whatever it is, some kind of progress. And that I saw that over and over again. I met these kind of people. Then I went back and I Googled it, and I read about it in news media, or I talked to colleagues about it. And immediately I got a lot of this pessimism around this negativity. And I felt frustrated, and then I became angry and angry. I was like, what the hell? We're missing so many opportunities now. There must be so many people that are afraid of trying something new because they know they'll face this onslaught of negative questions and all that. So that anger, I became angrier and angrier, and at the same time, I became more and more optimistic because I met more and more of these people. So that's when I decided to leave politics and start the Warp Institute instead, to do something about it, because I realized I'm only complaining about people complaining, so I'm not making much of a positive difference either. So my goal is to become only an optimist, not an angry optimist. I want to I want to help change the mindset of humanity, so we encourage these kind of people much more than criticize them.
And so you set up the Warp Institute, and you set out to gather together fact-based optimists. And I know your fans include people like Steven Pinker and others at Harvard. So what are the facts that should make us optimistic? I know your countryman Rosling, for instance, wrote a whole book called Factfulness. But from your perspective, Warp Institute, Mathias, what are the facts that should really encourage us to be optimistic?
There's sort of two basic categories. So first, it's the human progress, what Hans Rosling talked about, Steven Pinker, and many others are talking about. So that we've seen, for example, since 1990, over 100,000 people have left extreme poverty every day. That's kind of amazing. Every day since 1990, over 100,000 people have left extreme poverty. And we've seen, there are still 5 million children every year who die under the age of 5 who die, over 5 million. But it was 10 million 20 years ago. So even though and that's what Hans Rosling often said, something can be bad, but still get better. It's really bad that 5 million children die every year, but it has been much worse just 20 years ago. But we also see life expectancy rising, and we see education levels rising all over the world. So we're wealthier and healthier than ever before. And this has been going on for 300 years or so, but especially in the last 30 years. And we can see it's more, if people get more freedom, more democracy, and with that follows education and healthcare and income and all that. So that makes me very optimistic. It's not something magical that has made this happen. It's human freedom and democracy. So that's one part of it. One part of the fact. The other part is the kind of technological and scientific progress that we see, and of course very much intertwined with other types of human progress. But for example, now the AI revolution we're in the midst of now. I think there's a before and after ChatGPT, for example. It is releasing a lot of human creativity and democratizes access to these kind of tools that would make us smarter and faster and better, and just get this human creativity out of our brain in new ways. So that kind of technological progress also is a very important fact.
It's interesting. As I was preparing just this afternoon, we published stuff on, for instance, Ramadan and optimism, the Muslim month of fasting. And Also, it's Lent in the Christian calendar. And one of the quotes from a Christian saint, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, said, "Christian optimism is not a sugary optimism, nor it is a mere human confidence that everything will turn out all right. It is an optimism that sinks its roots into an awareness of our freedom." And I think really that's so similar to your view. One of my favorite thinkers in global government is Singapore's Senior Minister Tharman. And last year he gave a very strong speech on the collapse of optimism in the developed world. And he said for him, he believes it's the greatest public policy issue affecting us in the world today. And so if I can just quote him, if you don't mind, he said, "Creating bases for optimism has to be our central task everywhere in the world and through global collaboration. We must create bases for optimism to see ourselves through this long storm and to emerge intact, emerge in a better place, and it can be done." Sounds a bit like you. How do you think we're going on that task?
Well, not very not very good. I think there's way too much pessimism and negativity, and I don't mean the kind that is actually based on facts. There are bad things going on in the world. In my neighborhood here in Ukraine, for example, and many other places in the world, there are really bad things going on. So it's not that you shouldn't be critical of those things or be negative about those kind of things, but there's so many other things going on, and I think much more of the positive things going on, but that is sort of hidden in, especially in news media and the onslaught of negative headlines that have, at least in the US, and I think probably all over the world, increased in the last decade. But also social media is not really helping in that, even though social media is also a great way for us to express ourselves and getting our thoughts and ideas out. It's also strengthening a lot of this negative messaging. And I think it's up to many like you, Victor, and me, but also political leaders and other types of leaders, they really to change this narrative, because if people have, it's not that people should have an overly optimistic, they should have a fake positive view of the world. I just want them to have a fact-based view of the world. And a fact-based view is that, yes, there are bad things going on, but there are many more and very important good things going on. And if you have that view, I think many more people would be hopeful and optimistic about the future. And they will do many more things. They will have more ideas, and the power of optimism, and why I have on my T-shirt here, "The future is created by optimists," is that, and like Kevin Kelly wrote on our site on Warp News, that if to start something, you have to envision it first. If you can envision a positive future, whatever it is, if it's a tiny thing or for entire humanity or whatever, you must envision that and feel, okay, this could be something good to come out of this. We should do this. This future, whatever it is going to be better than the present. It's going to be amazing or whatever. And from that, you draw the strength to, go from an idea to actually do something. And the strength of optimism is that it creates this kind of action. But also when you run into problems, like you always do when you start a company or run a project or wherever, try something new, you run into some obstacles and problems that you have to solve along the way. Then you have much more energy to do that. You don't give up as easily. So optimists don't give up as easily. And if an optimist fails, and not everything succeeds, of course. If you fail, an optimist is more likely to try again with something new. So if we can change the mindset of humanity to have more people having this hopeful view of the world, we would have much more ideas and much more and better progress. So I think I agree with him, and it's very important that we change this, and it's up to all of us, obviously, but not at least political leaders and other types of leaders around the world.
We often, when we deliver seminars and the like, we say, in fact, it's almost impossible for a pessimist to innovate, because the pessimist is ground down by the failure and blaming themselves. Whereas my favorite example is Dyson, the vacuum cleaner guy, who famously said he had 5,000 models of the bagless vacuum cleaner before he achieved commercial success. He recently wrote an article, My Failures and What We Are Doing About It. And as you know, this initiated this conversation because I said, you know, we've got to help this man. You know, he's one of my favorite optimists. So tell us what you were thinking when you said my failures and what's going to change for you.
Yeah, so starting, like I said, starting something new is hard, and starting a media company where you can see that first of that negative media is dominant, and it is dominant for many reasons, but one reason is that humans react pretty strongly to negative headlines, and we've been doing that for thousands of years, and it was pretty good back then when we lived on the savannah or something. But like Hans Rosling said, the world is different now. It's not as dangerous as it was back then. So we have to fight this urge to click the negative headlines or fight this urge to see the danger. So it's hard, of course, to start a media company in that kind of an environment. On the other hand, there's of course a demand for this. We see that many people want these kind of other types of news, this kind of optimistic, fact-based optimistic news. But what I discovered and what I learned is that it's much harder to spread optimistic news than it is negative news. There are many optimistic news out there, but they spread very badly, and so we've had a hard time getting our news broadly spread across the world. That has been much more of a challenge that I thought. It's also so that's been a failure. Another failure is I've been very occupied with sort of the running of the company, taking care of staff, and all this fundraising and all these aspects. So I haven't had time to think and write and really do the things that have been necessary, spreading the mission of Warp Institute, both in text and talks and media and other aspects. So we felt, okay, it's time to really change things here. So we've now we've tested the new here for 3 or 4 weeks like that, and it's very different. Now I really have time to think and write, and I'm going to give many more talks. And now we've managed to get some of our news into other news media because we have time to really make sure we contact them or make sure they know about the news, and we've managed to create our own news. It's been much of rewriting other types of news. So but the community has been enormously supportive in this. So that feels great. But back to the strength of optimism, it feels like of course the path to success, whatever success is never straight. So but I feel, and you can say, okay, we've created a good sort of core engine here. Our news are popular and among the people who know us, but we've failed in spreading that. So yeah, maybe we should give up then. It's like, no. This mission is so important. I can see this future, and I want to fight so hard for it. So there's no way I would give up. We'll try something new here and see if that works better.
Well, you can be sure that we are going to be supporting you. So, and as you know, you can always use our material. We do every religion, and would you believe the favorite page on our website by Google search is Mother Julian of Norwich, who famously said, all shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well. The second favorite page by way of Google search is Gramsci, the Marxist, who in prison said, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So we reckon that if we can spread optimism on left, right, spiritual, unspiritual, we're happy to do it. So whatever we can do, to support you in those views, we'd really be happy to do that. So tell me a little bit more about the sentiment. Yesterday I was interviewed about the difference between Australia and Finland. Finland was number 1 on the happiness stakes, Australia number 12. And I said, when you look at the stats, you see that the number difference is very small, but 25% of the index is attitudes to government. And, when we ask people what makes you happy, I've never met anyone who tells me the government. When we ask what makes you optimistic, less than 1% say the government or the Prime Minister or the economy.
Yeah, and that must be the Prime Minister and the government probably saying that.
Well, we've actually, you'd be pleased with some of the success we did, because a couple of years ago we wrote a piece called A Framework for a Positive National Narrative. And so both the Prime Minister and, in our Westminster system, the Leader of the Opposition gets a lot of airplay. They were both using phrases that we'd written. And we were seeing that. And we see that our Prime Minister, for instance, today was announcing a referendum on a voice for Indigenous people. And he talked about it being an optimistic proposal. So, I think if you prompt and we send them emails and letters and ask them, what makes you optimistic? And I always send emails of praise when I've seen optimism appear in a parliamentarian speech. So it's getting there, but it's an interesting feature, particularly in Australia. Very few people are made optimistic, but think about the government. When you ask them what makes them optimistic, it's other stuff. It's mindset, it's life experience, it's faith. But one of my favourite people has joined us, Kerr-Bell. And Mathias, he is the leader of our Transformation and Change project. So he's quite brilliant. So Jeff, you've listened in. Well, what are your reflections?
And absolutely fascinated, Mathias, about the angry optimist. I really loved that, and I certainly identified with elements of that. That's for sure, and angry at people not being so optimistic. So and also wanting to drop the angry, I think, is great. But in terms of transformation and change, and I guess the area of life and business, because it is about making the world better. Transformation applies in business as much to anything, and we do live in this sort of times where we've got this dichotomy of crisis but opportunity, and I think the greater the crisis, the more the opportunity starts to become clearer. And in some ways, that's where the optimist opportunity starts to emerge. So I guess from the whether it's climate change, whether it's some of the challenges of the geopolitical situation and so on, but right down to sort of some of the commercial, the business and economic challenges we have at the moment. How do you see whether it's angry optimism or that excitement about startups and about creativity? How do you see that sort of playing out to some of these sort of really big, meaty world challenges?
I think in climate change, for example, it's last year I interviewed quite a few people who run startups in sort of the climate change space, and no surprise, I became very optimistic by talking to them, because I saw something similar going on, and it was that they sort of like 5-10 years ago, they sort of started to get worried about climate change and notice that this is something going on, and this is something, this is the problem. They started to see, okay, this is the problem. So that was the first insight. And then a few years, and they started thinking about this issue. What can I do? And then they decided a few years after that, then they decided I should really do something about it in whatever field I'm in now. And that So in some cases, they had to quit their current job and start their own company, or they had to, get some education, or, change careers. And, that took a few years as well. And now they started their companies maybe 1, 2, 3 years ago. And they're still, of course, still small companies because they're very, very young. But I felt the story was exactly the same. And that's why change and progress sometimes takes time. And but I felt like when people say nothing is going on in climate change, no one is doing anything, it's like, no, that's not true. I believe we should do more, but there are many people doing a lot of things. And I described it in an article as a tsunami of climate solutions. When the tsunami wave is out at sea, you don't notice it. It looks like any other wave. But when it comes into shore, suddenly we're going to be, in a positive way, drowned in climate solutions. But that's maybe 5, 10 years into the future, because some of these companies will fail. Some of them will be really successful. And we're going to stand there and be very surprised. Where did all this come from? It's been in the works for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, but it takes time. And there's so many different aspects. We have to change the entire society. So that made me very optimistic. And all of them, no one is starting a company and saying, hey, my solution is that we're going to be worse off. I'm trying to solve this, and I'm going to make it a little bit better along the way. It's going to be better for the climate, but it's also going to be better for us humans. So I think we don't have to look at climate change that, okay, we have to end up in a much, much worse world. We have to solve this problem. It's going to be a better world for humanity. It's going to be a lot of difference, and some of the changes is going to be hard on some people or many people. But that kind of startup mentality is very, very optimistic for me.
I love that. I love the analogy of the wave, because I think, oftentimes you're sort of standing on the shore and you see a wave, it's a long way away, and it just doesn't seem real until it gets very close. And I think you're right, when it comes into shore, I think that climate change in particular, but a number of the other sort of big meaty issues are coming in. I look to the Sustainable Development Goals, and you look at the progress on some of those. And sure, I really like what you said about the fact that some of these things are bad, but they're less bad now. So we are actually making progress. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals are probably good examples where, Einstein is sometimes attributed to saying, if I had an hour, I'd spend 59 minutes on the problem. And I think the fact that we've identified and articulated what those problems are, it allows us to focus our optimism and our energies towards solving those problems, rather than spending a lot of time spinning the wheels going, what are the problems? What are the problems? I'm stuck in this mire of problems. We've got some clarity around that. I'm sure there's some specificity. So I really like that idea of the wave and coming into shore, because I think that we've got a lot of that happening now. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's why I think it's so important to always, and the news media has a huge responsibility here to put things into perspective. You can easily make a headline and X number of children die every minute in the world, and it's horrible. And of course it is horrible. But if you know that 20 years ago the number was twice as high, then you feel, okay, we're making progress. And then you want to know, what are we doing? What are we doing to fix this problem? Why was it 10 million children who died 20 years ago, and why is it 5 million now? What can we do to get it? What have we done to get it from 10 to 5? And what can we do to get it to 1 and to eventually to 0, very close to 0? That's the thing you want to know. But many people seem to think that it's only the negative here that encourages people. And with climate change, it's like that you have to, it seems like many people think that you have to scare people as much as possible, and with doomsday scenarios and all that. And of course, negative things could happen if we don't do anything, of course. But I think many people, if you have too much of focus on the problem and the doomsday, that could turn people off. And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Things are going to hell anyway, so we can, keep doing whatever we've been doing. And I think you have to trust people to see that yes, for example, climate change is a real problem, but it's a problem that we can fix. And when something good happens, we should say that, and that won't make people. If something good happens in climate change, we make some progress. People won't immediately like, okay, we can stop caring about this problem now and move. That's not going to happen. So we should stop scaring people like that and trusting people to actually be able to think for themselves.
If I can butt in at this point, I mean, yes, you had the ICC report yesterday on climate, and the Inga Anderson, who's the leader of the United Nations Environment Programme, his press release was, it's the ultimate no-brainer. The synthesis report tells us we have the technology and the know-how to get the jobs done. And, renewables, energy efficiency, green transport. And Jeff, as you know, I'm on the board of a water company. We are likely to be carbon neutral by 2025 with the best waste to energy plant in the country starting to produce green hydrogen. It's not that hard. So I think the two of you have just nailed it. And both of you, what I admire about you is that understanding that successful change needs infectiously optimistic leadership. Jeff, what's that statistic you've got on the number of change projects which fail?
I think it's something like 74%, 75%. So it's in the low to mid 70s of change or transformation. Probably transformation projects is a better way of describing them, that fail. And some of the work we've done and research we've done at the Centre for Optimism around that highlights that it's very much, there's a lot of things that can be done to improve those statistics, but it very much starts with the mindset of the leadership and the way that they treat failure as almost a inevitability, and success would be a nice surprise. And that's a very unfortunate and terrible way to start a transformation project, as opposed to, sort of the expectation that lots of things will go wrong. That's realistic optimism. That the difference is you've got to add, but I believe we've got the capability in the team to be able to overcome all the problems. And we often miss that in some of the leadership around transformation projects. And we have more about I'm working through a system and a process, but not the end game in sight, and not the vision and not the inspiration for the team to realize that that's the outcome we're after. That's the impact we're seeking to have. And that's what we've got to keep reminding ourselves of as we progress through. So I think that, certainly our research and our work talks about the real importance of optimistic leadership in transformation projects and significant change.
That's super interesting, and that reminds me of when we started Warp Institute. So first, it was just this frustration and anger, and I talked to a few friends who I knew shared this frustration, and we said, let's try something. Let's try to do something about this, but we didn't know really what. So we organized a couple of meetups to see, is anyone else interested in this? And at the second or third meetup, we said, okay, let's try something new here. It was 60 minutes, and we said to people in the audience, during these 60 minutes, we're going to pitch a few ideas here. During these 60 minutes, you're not allowed to be negative. Of course, you can have negative thoughts in your head, and you can be negative the rest of the day if you want. But for these 60 minutes right now, we're only going to focus on the positive, on possibilities when we talk about these things. And then we pitched these ideas and talked about them in different groups and all that. And afterwards, when I walked back home, I felt it felt completely different from any other type of discussion I've ever had, because I remember I pitched an idea. I don't remember what it was actually, but I pitched one idea I had, and the discussion didn't end sort of one level in when we started thinking about different kind of problems so you can run into it. We sort of reached a second level, a third level of thinking. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, and then we could do that, and that could lead to that, and so like we talked about before here, Victor. I saw this. I much better saw these opportunities, and I felt, okay, this is how you should start a discussion. Then, of course, if you want to make something out of that idea and into a company or project, whatever, you also have to think about, oh, what are the problems we could run into, so we hopefully could avoid them, and But if we only had gone one level in thinking, when we started thinking about problems, you might give up. Oh shit, that problem is too hard, or we can't see a different path, or to your point there, Jeff, of the leadership there, I think that's crucial, and how you can, with a simple trick like that, you can actually, both for the leaders and for the team, really see this possibility, and feel it much stronger, and hopefully succeed with many more of these transformational projects.
Jeff works in the banking sector, so I remember someone other than Jeff complaining recently when he put up a proposal to the bank board. He had one document of only about 5 pages for the actual proposal. He had 6 negative risk documents that he had to file. And one of the things that Australian corporate governance has become really good at is negative risk analysis. And so one of my crusades on any of the boards that I'm on is to have positive risk in the risk register. So I'm so chuffed. After about 3 years of campaigning, our risk manager came into the board meeting, looked at me and said, "Victor, you will love this. I have blue for opportunity in the risk register." But I think, we had a very famous board leader in Australia, a guy called Gonski, who was chairman of the ANZ Bank and chairman of a whole lot of other things. And he always said that Australian boards were really, really good at avoiding negative risk, but really bad at taking responsibility for opportunity. And so I think one of our little crusades is helping people to incorporate positive risk into a risk register. And it might be a global problem, and I don't think it's just restricted to Australia. So do you see that in Scandinavia?
Yeah, I think it's been very similar, that it's a lot of focus on problem and risk, and sort of when you get, so we're involved in an energy project here, and I'm working together with one of the Swedish internet pioneers, and in the 90s, he and a few others completely, they were the true visionaries, and really changed how Sweden viewed telecommunications, and made us, at least for a few years there, a leader in that field. That opened up the mindset for many other people, that, oh, okay, these super visionary guys, they were right, and they did what they said. So that opened up the mindsets for a lot of people, and that sort of started the wave of successful startups in Sweden, like Spotify and Minecraft and many of those. So that just a few leaders in one field open up a new mindset, and that's changed the entire country. There's so much wealth and coming out of this startup sector now. But in many other fields, it's still the same. A lot of focus on risk and avoiding problems. And I talked to one of our investors and advisors in Warp. He runs a very large company, and they have private equity owners and investors in that. And said private equity get a lot of bad rap, but he says they actually have something that I haven't noticed in other investors and other. They always ask the question, what is the best possible outcome of this? If everything goes right here, or we do everything right, or we're close to it, what could, so they don't, of course, they also talk a lot about risk, but they have this crucial question: what could go right here? And if something goes right, what is the outcome here? And which many miss completely. They only focus on a small, tiny steps forward, maybe, and then a lot on the risk. So
one of the questions that's often asked here at meetings is, what keeps you awake at night? And of course, my response is nothing.
yeah.
The optimist can put risk in their context, fall asleep and deal with it in the morning. And I always like to ask the questions about optimism and positivity. And look, Stephen Su, his microphone's not working. And he wanted me to ask you this question. Mathias, I have 2 kids, 8 and 11, with all the challenges they are and will be facing. I'm excited for them, and at the same time cautious about how we approach it with them. From your perspective, how should parents with young kids encourage optimism and still have that parental, I want to protect them all the time?
Right. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I have he's almost 2 years now, so I haven't really started talking to him about these things, but I've started thinking about much more about them. I think at least my what I'm going to attempt to do is to try to show him as much possible of the world, and try to show him the facts, or what are close to facts about the world, and show him how human imagination and creativity, what an enormously strong force that is. And I'm definitely going to tell him many times that you who live in this generation, that is the generation who has the biggest opportunity of any generation in human history. And you're lucky enough to be born in one of the countries where you can grab these kind of opportunities. It's not going to be easy. You have to work hard for whatever it is. You can be unlucky, of course, but you have the opportunity, and you have a better opportunity than anyone before you, whatever it is that you want to do in life. And I don't know if he's going to listen to me or not. So I don't know how much I listen to my parents, but that's at least the message I'll try to get through to him, and but also show him as much as possible of the opportunities in the world, and hope that he finds something that inspires him.
I think both of you have got kids that have won the lottery, because you're both such positive people. The Dalai Lama, I was lucky enough to be in an audience with him last year, and he said a more optimistic attitude is key to the care of teenagers and children. A pessimistic attitude is very bad. Helping children to stay hopeful and still optimistic despite the difficulties is very important. And he went on to say, you can't tell kids to be optimistic. All we can do is model optimism.
Yeah, and you can see in kids, I have both anecdotal and big surveys that say their pessimism in all age groups, but especially in young people, and a lot of that ties to climate change. And it's one thing to be critical. I think it's very good to be critical of things. If you see something that's bad, you should be critical of that. But if that pessimism turns into hopelessness, and you think you can't do anything about it, that's really dangerous. And that's what I see in some young people now, but pretty young, and especially in teenagers, that they think the world is going to end, that humanity is going to end, and it's nothing they can do anything about. But if they could turn that, if they and they rightfully so, they can think, okay, well, why the hell are we in this climate change problem? They should have started doing something about this in the 90s. They should, and they can be super critical about, and that's totally fine. If that turns into action and changing things and feeling we could fix this problem, we could create all these possibilities. instead. But that's the hopelessness that's and that was what sort of this exaggerated pessimism leads to. That I think is dangerous, and I'm a little bit worried about that. But I think definitely it can change.
Yeah, in Australia, there's an interesting phenomenon. Over the last 10 years, the number of people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs has doubled. We're actually number 2 to Iceland. Now, Iceland, it makes sense. It's dark, 40% of the year, it's cold. In Australia, it's almost inexplicable. And McKinsey and others have actually quite bewildered by it as a phenomenon. I think it's got a lot to do with the way the news reports Australia, always in the negative. But coming back to, Jeff has a foot in both camps in Australia and New Zealand. And Jacinda Ardern, who's just retired as the Prime Minister of New Zealand on climate, said this: you may well argue that based on our current trajectory, now is not the time for optimism. But if we only talk about the loss of glacier mass or sea level rises, we run the risk of a society that believes it's all lost and it's too late. It's not. No one has the luxury of copping out, not those who deny climate change, nor those who believe it's too far gone. And she concluded this speech at the UN General Assembly. Now is the time for optimism and for hope, and crucially for a plan. And I think, Mathias, you and the Warp Institute are certainly global leaders in that.
Thank you very much. And yeah, that's an excellent speech. I 100% agree. You can't just, you shouldn't be afraid of being optimistic about solving problems. People won't ignore problems just because you think you can solve them. And I think the way to solve them is to be optimistic about them. So yeah.
Mathias, what I really love to sum up what we've discussed really is that the question on my t-shirt and the question we pose to people to get them into an optimistic mindset is, what makes you optimistic? But it's beautifully answered by your t-shirt, and the future is created by optimists. So thank you very much. And have you got any final words for us?
Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for inviting me and for the support. It goes the other way as well. And that's my sort of core idea with Warp was that if we can build a community of optimistic, forward-looking people from all over the world and bring them together in different ways, that is going to change the world, or at least we will really give ourselves the chance to change the world. And that's been so amazing with Warp, meeting these kind of people and getting in touch with you and collaborating with you and many others all over the world. And you see the power of that, and I would love to visit Australia, but it's also awesome that you can visit in this way and talk to you in this way. So thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode of the Optimism Cafe with Mathias Sundin, Victor Perton and Jeff Kerr-Bell. We'd love you to get involved with what we're doing with the Optimism movement and supporting people like Mathias and the Warp Institute. So go to our website, sign up to become a member of our community, either just by subscribing to the blog or becoming a member or a supporter. Trust you have a great day, and remember, optimism always.